A quiet city evening carried the illusion of control. Yet within moments, that illusion would be torn apart by a single stop on a lonely road. What looked like routine procedure unfolded into a clash that ripped away the masks of authority and revealed a hidden truth too powerful to ignore. Behind the harsh lights and cold voices lay a secret no one expected. A secret that turned humiliation into exposure and silence into thunder. The people who believed they held all the power would soon face consequences they could never escape, while the one they tried to break would become the force that unraveled everything. Keep watching, because the twist waiting ahead changes the meaning of every detail you thought you understood. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share in the comments where you're watching from and what you think is coming next. General Angela Brooks was a proud Black woman whose entire life carried the weight of service, sacrifice, and strength. And on this night, she was reminded that no matter how high a Black American could rise, there were still those determined to pull her down. At 52 years old, she had earned every star on her shoulders, every medal pinned to her chest, and every ounce of respect from Marines who had followed her into battle across continents. Yet here in her own country, in her own community, she was reduced to suspicion not because of her actions, but because of the color of her skin. She was driving her modest sedan through the quiet evening streets of Westfield Heights, a predominantly Black neighborhood she had known since her youth, its streets filled with families, barbershops, churches, and resilience. She knew the contrast well. Just a few blocks ahead lay Greenfield, a wealthy white suburb where lawns were manicured, sidewalks gleamed, and the unspoken message was clear: some belonged, and some did not. Angela understood she carried both worlds inside her, the dignity of a general and the reality of a Black citizen whose rights were fragile when challenged by men who wore badges without honor. As she approached the border of Greenfield, the blue and red glow of police lights erupted in front of her, blocking her way. She slowed her vehicle instinctively, rolling her window down before being told, because discipline was her armor, composure her weapon. She had been briefed on the existence of these checkpoints, allegedly designed for community safety, but she had also read the reports, heard the whispered complaints, and knew that people who looked like her were stopped, harassed, and often arrested, while white drivers were waved through. This was not safety. This was control. Officer Mark Stevens approached first, flashlight beam slicing across her face, as though she were already guilty of something. "License and registration," he said flatly, the tone carrying the arrogance of someone used to blind obedience. Angela announced her every move carefully, the way she had taught soldiers to move under pressure. "I am reaching into my glove compartment," she said clearly, retrieving the documents and handing them over. Stevens studied her license, and Angela saw his eyes narrow when he reached the line that read, "Westfield Heights." He repeated it into his radio, drawing out the words as if they confirmed his worst suspicions. Angela did not flinch. She had been stared down by warlords and dictators. The glance of a prejudiced officer would not break her. "Is there a problem with my identification, officer?" she asked evenly. Stevens did not answer, turning instead to walk back toward his cruiser. In her mirror, Angela saw him laughing with another officer, showing them her license, pointing at her car like a joke to be shared at her expense. A few seconds later, Captain Richard Cole emerged. He moved with the confidence of rank, but his authority reeked of something else: entitlement, bias, the conviction that his badge made him untouchable. He placed his hand casually on his holster as he approached, each step slow and deliberate. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he ordered, his voice devoid of respect though the word ma'am was spoken. Angela's eyes remained calm. "May I ask why, Captain?" "My license is valid." Cole's smile was thin and sharp. "Enhanced search protocol," he said. "Out of the car." Angela's training guided her. She knew the law, she knew the Constitution, and she knew her rights. "Enhanced searches require reasonable suspicion of criminal activity," she reminded him, her voice calm, her posture unshaken. "What's your suspicion?" Cole's eyes darkened. "Out of the car," he repeated, this time with his hand pressing more firmly against the holster. Angela breathed slowly and deliberately. Defiance now would be twisted against her. Compliance would be her strategy, but not submission. She stepped out, movements precise, every detail recorded in her mind as though this were a military exercise. "I would like to note," she said loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "that this appears to be selective enforcement." Cole leaned in close, his breath hot, his voice dripping with disdain. "We decide what's selective," he said. "Hands on the hood." Angela placed her hands on the cold metal. "I decline consent to search my vehicle without probable cause," she replied clearly. Stevens stepped closer, smirking. "Look at the lawyer here. Thinks she knows the law." Angela did not react to the insult. "I am familiar with my Fourth Amendment rights," she said steadily. Cole's voice sharpened. "Your kind always make things difficult." Angela raised her chin slightly, her eyes meeting his. "My kind?" she asked with deliberate control. "Troublemakers," Cole muttered, though the venom in his tone told the truth. Around them, cars idled. White drivers were waved through with casual nods, their windows barely rolled down, while black drivers waited, lights shining into their faces, questions sharp and accusatory. Some passengers raised phones to record. Cole noticed, motioning quickly for Officer Davis to clear those vehicles and stop the recordings. Angela's eyes tracked each movement, each badge, each license plate. Her mind stored the details like coordinates on a map. Cole gave his final ultimatum: consent to search or face obstruction charges. Angela's voice remained steady. "I respectfully decline and request a supervisor." Cole smirked, enjoying the game. "I am the supervisor," he said coldly, then motioned to Stevens. "Detain her." Stevens grabbed Angela's arm, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary force. Pain flared through her shoulder, but her voice rang out strong. "I am not resisting. I am complying under protest." Stevens shouted anyway, "Stop resisting," to anyone watching. Cole moved closer, sneering. "You don't tell us how to do our jobs." Angela's eyes flicked to Stevens' body camera. She saw the red light blink off. "Your body camera appears to be malfunctioning, Officer Stevens," she noted evenly. Stevens tightened his grip. Angela could have ended it in seconds. Her training gave her the ability to dismantle both men before they could blink. But this was not about her strength. Tonight was about evidence, about exposing what lay beneath the surface of these so-called checkpoints. She reminded herself that her restraint was her weapon, and her silence was her strength. The flashing lights of the checkpoint reflected off the windshield of passing cars, and she noted with grim clarity how white drivers were waved through without pause, while black drivers, some families with children in the backseat, were made to wait and endure humiliation. It was a pattern she had seen before, and tonight she would let it unfold so the evidence could stand undeniable. Cole leaned down close to her ear, lowering his voice so bystanders would not hear. "People like you always think you're special, but not tonight. Tonight, you learn who's in charge." Angela kept her chin high and responded in an even tone that carried farther than he expected. "Tonight, the world will learn who's in charge of justice." Stevens shoved her toward the police cruiser, pressing her head down harshly, as if she were already a convicted criminal. Angela did not resist, though she spoke clearly for the record. "Officer Stevens, badge number 4572. Your use of force is excessive and unnecessary." Stevens barked back, "Shut up," but her watch continued recording, transmitting every detail to the Pentagon in real time. Angela allowed her eyes to wander just enough to notice a young woman in a nearby car discreetly holding up a phone to capture the scene. Their eyes met briefly, and Angela gave the faintest nod of acknowledgement, hoping that someone beyond official channels would hold a record of this night. The door of the cruiser slammed behind her, the interior dark and suffocating, the smell of vinyl and stale air filling her lungs. She sat upright, refusing to hunch, her back pressed firmly against the seat. Her mind moved with military precision, reviewing the Pentagon protocol she had triggered. In less than 40 minutes, a response team would be on site. Until then, she would endure and gather. The drive to the station was silent except for the crackle of the police radio. Cole muttered to Stevens in low tones about making an example out of people from Westfield Heights, laughing as if the humiliation of a black resident was entertainment. Angela stared out the window at the blurred lights of Greenfield passing by, every manicured lawn and shining storefront reminding her of the divide that defined this town. She felt the cuffs cutting into her skin, but she focused instead on the larger wound, the wound of systemic injustice that festered beneath the surface of American life. At the Greenfield station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Stevens yanked her from the backseat. "Move it," he said, shoving her toward the entrance. Angela walked with steady steps, forcing her captors to keep pace rather than drag her. Inside, the station smelled of sweat, coffee, and disinfectant, the stale odor of a system too used to processing human beings like inventory. She was guided to a desk where a booking officer barely looked up. "Name?" he asked flatly. "General Angela Brooks," she answered with clarity. He typed without reacting, then asked for her address. When she gave her Westfield High Street, he paused, glancing up with a flicker of prejudice before continuing. Stevens and Cole chuckled loudly near the water cooler, their voices carrying. "Another one from that neighborhood thinking she's special," Stevens said. "Had to put her in her place," Cole replied. Angela listened, her mind cataloging every inflection, every insult, every officer present who heard and did nothing. When asked for fingerprints, she pressed her thumb deliberately, black ink staining her skin like a mark of defiance. Her mugshot was taken, the camera clicking as she stood perfectly straight, shoulders squared, face calm, eyes unwavering. They wanted to capture an image of defeat, but what they recorded instead was dignity. "Phone call," the booking officer said, gesturing to the wall. "One call. Make it count." Angela walked to the phone, her hands still cuffed, and dialed from memory. The line clicked, and a crisp voice answered. "Operation Center, Pentagon." Angela spoke with clarity. "Authorization code Tango Delta 794. Initiating protocol oversight Delta. Location transmitting now." There was silence for 2 seconds, then confirmation. "Response team deploying. Timeline 43 minutes." Angela hung up, turning slowly as Councilman Charles Whitman entered the station. His tailored suit and polished shoes announced wealth and influence, and his smile was the polished mask of a man used to bending systems for his own benefit. He glanced at her through the glass and sneered. "Another troublemaker?" he asked Cole, who nodded. "Just processing her now, sir." Whitman's smile widened. "Good. These checkpoint resistors need consequences. The program must be protected." Angela sat on the metal bench in the holding cell, back straight, her face composed, the cuffs still cutting into her wrists. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It read 9:17 p.m. In exactly 43 minutes, the landscape of this station, this city, and perhaps this entire program would change forever. She was aware of the camera pointed toward the holding area, and she sat deliberately upright, her back straight, her gaze forward, projecting not a victim but a witness, a soldier documenting a battlefield. 40 minutes, she reminded herself, because the Pentagon team had confirmed their timeline, and in that time she would gather as much as she could. She noted every officer who passed by, how some glanced at her with open hostility and others with disinterest, but not one treated her with the basic respect she had earned both as a citizen and as a human being. The booking officer returned to the cell, handing her back her driver's license and registration, but not her military ID, which he claimed was being verified. She did not challenge him because she wanted him to feel emboldened in his misconduct, knowing that each word and action was being preserved in her watch and would later be displayed before federal officials. Captain Cole re-entered the holding area with a folder in his hands, tossing it onto the bench beside her. "Victoria Brooks," he said deliberately, mispronouncing her first name though her license clearly stated Angela. "Address, Westfield Heights. First time being educated about checkpoint compliance." His tone was mocking, his smirk wide as if he believed he held every card. Angela turned her head slowly toward him and said clearly, "I will speak to my attorney." Cole laughed, circling her like a predator testing prey. "Soon enough," he replied, ignoring her invocation of her rights. "Right now, we're just having a conversation." Angela repeated calmly, "I invoke my right to counsel. making sure to enunciate each syllable for the audio being captured. Cole ignored her again, pressing on. "We have a problem in this town. People who don't respect authority. People who think rules don't apply to them." He leaned closer, his eyes trying to pierce her calm exterior. "Checkpoints keep Greenfield safe. And you people from Westfield Heights don't like being checked, do you?" Angela stared at him, offering no response. Her military training had prepared her to resist interrogation far harsher than this. She knew silence was sometimes more powerful than words. Cole grew impatient, flipping through her belongings and pulling out her military ID. He glanced at it, then chuckled. "Marine Corps General for stars," he read aloud with disdain. He tossed it onto the table between them. "Nice fake. We'll add impersonating a military officer to your charges." Angela let her eyes meet his and said firmly, "That identification is authentic." Cole laughed harder. "And I'm the Secretary of Defense." He turned to leave, muttering, "We'll see what the councilman thinks of you." Angela remained composed, her breathing steady, her mind cataloging the violation. Through the thin walls, she heard Cole briefing Councilman Whitman, his words dripping with arrogance. "Gave us the usual constitutional speech. Had a fake military ID too." Whitman's voice answered, smooth and confident. "Get what you need and process her. Make an example. The checkpoint program is too important to be undermined." Angela memorized every phrase, her photographic memory storing them like evidence in a case file. The door opened again, and Cole returned with Stevens at his side. He slapped a paper on the table and pushed it toward her. "Sign this confession for obstruction. Plead guilty to a misdemeanor, and you'll be out by morning. Refuse, and things get a lot worse." Angela glanced at the document without touching it. "I will not sign anything without my attorney," she said clearly. Stevens loomed behind her chair, his hands heavy on her shoulders, meant to intimidate. Cole leaned in, lowering his voice. "You people from Westfield Heights think you're special, but Councilman Whitman's program has cut crime in Greenfield by 30%. Angela raised her eyebrows slightly. "By targeting specific neighborhoods?" she asked. Cole's expression hardened. "By enforcing the law where it needs to be enforced." Angela responded with calm precision. "Selective enforcement is not legal enforcement." Stevens pressed harder on her shoulders and Cole snarled, "You should listen to the captain." Angela did not flinch, her voice steady. "This interview is over until my counsel arrives." Cole stepped on her military ID with his boot, grinding it against the floor before picking it up again. "This little costume doesn't impress me," he sneered, tossing the ID back onto the table. The tension broke suddenly when the door opened and Detective Samuel Reed entered. Reed, younger than Cole but carrying himself with a professionalism absent in the others, glanced at the scene and frowned. "Captain, may I speak with you outside?" Cole looked irritated, but eventually gestured to Stevens to stay with Angela and left with Reed. Through the wall, Angela could hear the muffled but urgent tones of their conversation. Reed's voice was firm, citing violations of protocol, while Cole's voice rose with anger. After several minutes, the door opened again. Reed entered, holding her military ID in his hand. He examined it carefully under the light, tracing the holographic seals, the microprinting, the embedded security features. "Captain, this is genuine," Reed said with certainty. "These are real credentials." Cole scoffed. "It's a good fake." Reed shook his head. "No, sir. I served before joining the department. This is authentic. 4 stars, the highest rank in the Marine Corps. Do you realize who we've arrested?" Cole's confidence faltered, though he quickly masked it with bluster. "So she stole it. Add it to the charges." Reed ignored him, turning directly to Angela. "Ma'am, may I confirm your name and rank?" Angela nodded. "General Angela Brooks, United States Marine Corps." Reed straightened instinctively, his posture shifting into military bearing, a respect ingrained deeper than his badge. "General," he said formally, "what brings you to Greenfield tonight?" Cole cut in angrily. "Her occupation is irrelevant. She is being processed for obstruction." Reed stood his ground. "Captain, department policy requires verification of military credentials." Section 14 of our procedural manual is clear. We are already in violation of multiple procedures: detention without counsel, continued questioning after rights invocation, excessive force, and now refusing to verify credentials. Cole bristled. "Detective, remember your place." Reed's tone did not waver. The door swung open and Councilman Charles Whitman strode in, his tailored suit and polished shoes announcing power that came not from service, but from politics and privilege. His smile was tight, calculated, the smile of a white politician who had grown comfortable using authority to mask prejudice. He ignored Reed entirely, his gaze falling on Angela with a smirk that betrayed disdain. "This is the one causing trouble?" he asked, his voice smooth but sharp like glass. Cole nodded quickly, eager to align himself with Whitman's authority. "Yes, sir. Another resistor from Westfield Heights. We're processing her now." Whitman's eyes narrowed as he studied Angela, who sat calmly despite the cuffs biting into her skin. "Good," he said. "These checkpoint resistors need consequences. The program is too important to allow them to undermine it." His words dripped with a kind of arrogance that came from years of unchecked power. Angela tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but carrying weight. "The program is built on discrimination, Councilman. That makes it unconstitutional." Whitman's smirk deepened, his tone patronizing. "What makes it important is safety, General. Something people like you seem to forget when you question authority." Reed shifted uncomfortably, stepping forward. "Sir, with all due respect, there are clear violations here. We should be verifying her credentials properly." Whitman dismissed him with a glance, as if swatting away an insect. "Detective Reed, isn't it? You've only been here a few months. Perhaps you don't understand how things work in Greenfield. We maintain order. Complaints are expected but irrelevant." Reed's jaw tightened, but Angela spoke first, her voice steady. "Maintaining order by violating rights isn't law enforcement. It's oppression." Cole slammed his hand on the table, his frustration boiling over. "Enough of this lecture. You're under arrest for obstruction, and that's not changing." Angela leaned back slightly, unbothered by his outburst. "You think these cuffs silence me, Captain, but every word spoken in this room tonight is already preserved and transmitted." Cole blinked, realizing too late that her watch had never left her wrist. Whitman turned his gaze back to her, suddenly cautious. "Transmitted to whom?" Angela met his eyes, her expression calm. "To the Pentagon." For the first time, Whitman's smile faltered, a crack in the facade of control he had carefully cultivated. Reed saw it too, and his respect for the woman in front of him deepened. Here was a black general, seated in a cell like countless others from her neighborhood, yet she carried herself with more authority than anyone in the building. Whitman tried to recover, straightening his jacket. "Even if you are who you claim, misunderstandings happen. I'm sure we can resolve this quietly." Angela's gaze did not waver. "Systematic violations are not misunderstandings, Councilman. They are patterns of abuse." Whitman stepped closer, lowering his voice though the microphone in Angela's watch picked up every word. "Listen carefully, General. You may have power elsewhere, but here in Greenfield, I decide what happens. You step out of line, and you'll find out just how quickly influence can vanish." Reed's voice cut through the tension, calm but firm. "Councilman, the Pentagon already knows she's here. Pretending this is local business won't hold." Cole snapped at him. "Stay out of this, Detective. You don't get to lecture your superiors." Reed met his glare without backing down. "My duty is to the law, Captain, not to political games." Angela's eyes shifted between them, recognizing in Reed a rare ally, someone who understood that justice demanded courage even when standing alone. Outside the interrogation room, voices grew louder, officers shouting as phones rang in unison. The front desk was flooded with calls from Washington, from the Pentagon, from state officials. Cole tried to mask his unease, but sweat had begun to bead at his temples. Whitman turned toward the glass, his face tightening as he saw the officers scrambling. He turned back to Angela, his tone sharp. "If you think you can destroy years of work with one phone call, you underestimate me." Angela's response was calm, deliberate, the kind of statement that would outlive the walls of the station. "I don't underestimate you, Councilman. I expose you." Stevens re-entered, his face pale. "Sir, multiple lines are ringing off the hook. They're all asking about General Brooks by name." The Pentagon confirmed her identity. Cole's face drained of color, and Whitman's composure faltered completely. He turned back to Angela, his voice strained. "If you are a general, then you understand the importance of keeping order. Surely we can work this out." Angela stood, her hands still cuffed, but her posture commanding. "Order without justice is not order. It's tyranny. And I swore an oath to defend this nation against enemies foreign and domestic. You've made yourself the latter." Reed took a step forward, holding the key to her cuffs in his hand. He glanced at Whitman, then at Cole, and then unlocked the restraints with a steady motion. "My apologies, General," he said formally. The metal cuffs clattered onto the table, a sound that echoed like a gavel striking judgment. Whitman's voice rose, desperate. "Detective, what do you think you're doing?" Detective Samuel Reed stood his ground, his eyes fixed on General Angela Brooks with a respect that Cole refused to acknowledge. His tone steady as he said again, "We must follow procedure." Whitman's voice sharpened. "Detective, you've overstepped. Step out now." Reed did not move, and Angela, still rubbing the raw skin of her wrists, straightened her back and spoke evenly. "I have already requested counsel. Continuing this without representation is unlawful." Cole slammed a folder on the table, ignoring her words. "You think rank saves you? You think being from Westfield Heights makes you immune? Not here." He shoved a document across the table. "This is a signed confession of obstruction. Admit guilt, sign, and we end this tonight. No more Pentagon calls, no more spectacle. Just a misdemeanor, and you go home." Angela did not touch the paper. Her eyes remained calm, unwavering. "Without counsel present, I will not sign. I invoke my rights again." Cole sneered, leaning in close enough that the anger radiated off him. "Your rights end at this table. You're not in some Senate hearing. You're in Greenfield, and you answer to me." Reed interjected, his tone firm. "Captain, she's right. She invoked counsel, and we've already crossed the line by questioning her. We're building a case against ourselves." Cole spun on him, his face red. "You're either with us or against us, Reed. Which is it?" Reed didn't flinch. "I'm with the law." Whitman tried to restore control, his politician's voice attempting smoothness, but carrying a note of desperation. "Gentlemen, let's keep our heads. We have to think about the bigger picture. This program protects our neighborhoods, raises property values, ensures safety. Don't let one resistor derail it." Angela's voice cut through his words, calm but sharp. "You mean it protects your neighborhoods at the expense of mine? It raises property values by forcing black families from their homes. That's not safety. That's exploitation." Whitman turned on her, his composure breaking. "You don't understand politics, General. You fight wars overseas, but this is about controlling what happens here, about keeping order in the streets." Angela raised her chin. "Order without justice is oppression, and oppression is exactly what you have institutionalized through these checkpoints." Stevens entered then, his voice carrying irritation. "Captain, she's still refusing. Maybe she needs a little persuasion." He moved behind Angela's chair, pressing his hands heavily on her shoulders, his grip firm and invasive. Cole nodded as if to say intimidation was a tactic worth trying. Angela stayed perfectly still, her voice level. "Every move you make is evidence. Every threat, every word, every action is being preserved." Stevens leaned closer, his whisper venomous. "What good is evidence if no one listens?" Angela's calm reply cut him like steel. "They're already listening." The phone on the wall rang again, its shrill tone filling the room. Cole snatched it up angrily, snapping, "Cole." His expression shifted almost instantly, irritation giving way to alarm. "Yes, sir," he said into the receiver, his tone dropping in respect. "Yes, she's here. Understood." He hung up slowly, his face pale. Whitman's eyes narrowed. Who was that? Cole hesitated. Colonel Daniel, right from the Pentagon's military police. They've confirmed her identity. They're sending representatives now. The silence that followed was suffocating. Whitman's polished confidence evaporated, his shoulders tensing, his jaw clenching. He looked at Angela, realizing at last what she truly was. "If you are who you say you are," he said carefully, "then surely you understand the need for discretion. We can handle this locally, quietly. No need to ruin careers over a misunderstanding." Angela's response was steady, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded thousands. "This isn't a misunderstanding, Councilman. It's an investigation, and you've already provided enough evidence to prove systemic abuse." Reed took a step closer to her, speaking in a respectful tone. "General, what would you like done now?" Angela met his eyes. "What happens now is justice." Whitman bristled, trying to salvage control. "Detective, don't be fooled. This is entrapment. She provoked this. She wanted this outcome." Angela's gaze turned to him, calm and unyielding. "I drove through a public checkpoint with valid documents. I was detained because of where I live and the color of my skin. That's not provocation. That's reality." The station outside grew louder, engines rumbling as vehicles pulled into the lot. Officers shouted, doors slammed, radios crackled with confusion. Reed moved to the window and saw black SUVs pulling up, men in uniform disembarking. He turned back with a quiet certainty. "They're here." Cole's hands trembled slightly as he gathered the folder from the table, his bravado collapsing in the face of incoming authority. Stevens shifted uncomfortably, his grip leaving Angela's shoulders as though the weight of what he had done finally struck him. Whitman remained standing, his eyes flickering between defiance and fear. Angela stood slowly, her wrists bruised but her stance unbroken. "I warned you this wasn't just about me. This is about every black driver who's been stopped, searched, and arrested under your program. Tonight, that ends." The door swung open and Colonel Wright entered, flanked by 2 military police officers. His voice was crisp, authoritative. "General Brooks." He saluted, and Angela returned the salute with precision. Whitman sputtered, his tone desperate. "Colonel, this has all been a misunderstanding, a minor mistake." Wright cut him off coldly. Captain Richard Cole paced like a caged animal, his anger barely concealed, while Officer Mark Stevens leaned against the wall, visibly shaken by the sudden realization that their victim was not only innocent, but far more powerful than any of them had imagined. Detective Samuel Reed, however, stood tall, his gaze steady on Angela, as if waiting for the right moment to prove that not all in Greenfield's system were corrupted. Colonel Wright ordered Cole to vacate the interrogation room, his tone sharp, but before Cole could respond, Reed interjected with rare boldness. "Colonel, if I may, the violations here extend beyond tonight. What General Brooks has endured is not an isolated incident. It is the result of a pattern that has been implemented and protected at the highest levels of this city." Wright raised an eyebrow at Reed, studying him, then glanced toward Angela as if asking silently if this detective could be trusted. Angela gave a subtle nod. She had watched Reed carefully, seen how he recognized her credentials when others mocked them, heard his insistence on protocol when his superiors tried to ignore it. She knew integrity when she saw it. Wright stepped aside, giving Reed the floor. Reed swallowed hard, his voice firm but respectful. "Sir, Councilman Whitman has used these checkpoints to target Westfield Heights residents, overwhelmingly black drivers, under the pretense of crime reduction. I've reviewed arrest statistics, body camera footage, and internal communications. The patterns are undeniable. When I raised concerns through official channels, I was reassigned. Complaints from citizens disappeared. Evidence was altered or deleted. This program has been designed to exploit, not protect." Whitman laughed bitterly, though it sounded hollow. "Detective Reed is new here, Colonel. He doesn't understand the necessity of strong measures to maintain order. He's soft, impressionable, still clinging to textbooks and ideals. But in the real world, you do what it takes to keep the street safe." Angela turned toward him, her voice calm but cutting. Safe for whom, Councilman? Safe for those who already benefit from privilege, while families in Westfield Heights live under fear of harassment. You call it safety, but it's segregation disguised as policy. Cole tried to jump in, desperate to restore his authority. These checkpoints were approved legally. We followed Ordinance 27-9, signed into effect by the council itself. Reed faced him directly, and every line of that ordinance is unconstitutional. It establishes authority without probable cause, allows selective enforcement, and authorizes stops based on neighborhood demographics. You didn't follow the law, Captain, you broke it. Cole's face reddened. You're out of line, Detective. Reed's answer was steady. No, Captain, you've been out of line for months. Tonight, you finally got caught. Angela watched the exchange, her respect for Reed deepening. Here was a white officer in a corrupt system willing to risk his career to tell the truth, not because it benefited him, but because it was right. She knew his courage mattered, because true change required allies from both sides of the divide. Wright finally spoke, his voice carrying authority that silenced the room. General Brooks, Detective Reed, thank you. From this moment forward, this station is under federal oversight. Evidence will be collected, all procedures reviewed, and no one leaves without clearance. Whitman's voice rose, desperate. Colonel, you can't just waltz in here and take over. This is a local matter. Federal intrusion is not authorized. Wright turned to him slowly, his expression unyielding. With respect, Councilman, when United States Marine Corps General is unlawfully detained and civil rights are systematically violated, federal oversight is not only authorized, it is mandatory. Stevens shifted uncomfortably, his earlier arrogance drained away. Angela addressed him directly, her voice even but piercing. Officer Stevens, when you twisted my arm and shouted that I was resisting when I clearly was not, did you believe that was justice, or did you believe no one would ever hold you accountable? Stevens tried to speak, but his words faltered, his gaze dropping. Cole attempted to cover for him, snapping. She was non-compliant. We followed protocol. Angela shook her head. Your protocol is harassment. Your enforcement is prejudice. Your authority has become abuse. Reed spoke again, his voice carrying a conviction that filled the room. General Brooks isn't the first. I've seen elderly men detained for hours, young black mothers accused of obstruction for questioning why they were stopped, teenagers humiliated in front of their friends. None of them had rank or influence to protect them. They endured it because they had no choice. Tonight, the difference is that you picked the wrong woman. Angela turned toward Reed, her eyes softening slightly. And tonight, you chose to do the right thing. That matters. Whitman scoffed, but his eyes betrayed fear. One detective doesn't change a city. You'll be transferred again, buried in paperwork until you quit. This program is bigger than you think. Reed stood firm. Programs built on injustice collapse the moment truth comes to light. Tonight is that moment. Wright gestured to the military police, who began escorting officers from the room for questioning. Cole resisted, shouting, "This is illegal. You can't interrogate me in my own station." Wright replied calmly, "We're not in your station anymore, Captain. You lost control when you put cuffs on a general." Angela allowed herself the faintest smile, not of triumph, but of acknowledgement that the tide had shifted. She rubbed her wrists, the sting still there, a reminder of humiliation, but also a reminder that she carried the weight of countless others who had not been believed. Now, with Reed's testimony and Wright's authority, those voices would finally be heard. Whitman, however, remained dangerous. He leaned forward, his voice low but filled with venom. "General, you may have won tonight, but you have no idea what forces you've unleashed. This city will not bow to federal oversight without a fight. You'll drag us into chaos." Angela met his gaze, her expression steady. Justice isn't chaos, Councilman. It's accountability. And accountability is what terrifies you most. Reed nodded, his voice quiet but resolute. She's right. This isn't the end of order. It's the beginning of fairness. Wright called for the room to clear, establishing the command center in the station's main conference area. Angela stood slowly, stretching her shoulders, her eyes falling on Reed once more. "Detective, when the time comes, your testimony will be crucial. Are you prepared for that?" Reed's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, General. I won't let this program continue. Not here. Not anywhere." The moment was not lost on anyone. A black general, standing bruised but unbroken, and a white detective, young but principled, had formed an alliance rooted in truth. It was a kind of alliance that could expose corruption and demand reform, the kind that proved justice could not be confined to race or rank, but to courage and conviction. Outside, the sound of military vehicles idling grew louder, the signal that the federal presence was here to stay. Angela glanced at the clock. Less than an hour ago, she had been forced against her car hood, mocked, and handcuffed. Detective Samuel Reed stood nearby, still in disbelief that the station, where he had been assigned 6 months ago, had transformed overnight into the epicenter of a federal investigation. Councilman Charles Whitman paced near the corner, his confident facade crumbling further with each ringing phone and each knock on the door, his mind frantic as he realized that the very program he had nurtured for political and financial gain was unraveling in real time. Captain Richard Cole, stripped of his swagger, sat hunched with arms crossed, sweat beading at his temple as he tried to convince himself that he still held some measure of control, while Officer Mark Stevens lingered silently, pale and shaken, the reality of his actions crashing down with suffocating weight. The door opened and an aide hurried in, whispering into Colonel Wright's ear. Wright nodded once, then addressed the room in a voice that commanded attention. "We have direct confirmation from the Pentagon. General Brooks's identity is verified, and Oversight Protocol Delta has been activated. Effective immediately, this station is under federal command." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Angela inclined her head slightly, not in surprise, but in affirmation. She had known this moment was coming the instant she pressed the hidden transmitter on her watch back at the checkpoint. Reed exhaled slowly, a quiet sense of vindication flooding through him. Whitman, however, erupted. "This is outrageous. You can't strip authority from local officials without cause. The Pentagon has no jurisdiction over municipal programs." Wright's gaze was cold. "Councilman, when municipal programs are weaponized to violate civil rights, and when a United States general is unlawfully detained, federal jurisdiction is not just allowed, it is required. Your authority ends here." Whitman's face flushed crimson. "You're destroying the foundation of order in this city. Do you know how many residents support these checkpoints? Do you understand the chaos you'll unleash?" Angela rose from her chair, her presence filling the room. Order built on fear is not order. Support built on lies is not consent. Chaos is what you created when you decided that the Constitution could be bent to serve your own interests. Cole slammed his fist on the table, desperate to assert himself. She was resisting. She refused a lawful search. "This is all political theater." Reed turned sharply toward him, his voice steady but cutting. She complied under protest. She stated it clearly, and you twisted her arm and claimed resistance. "I saw the reports, Cole. Dozens of them. Same language every time. Stop resisting when no one was resisting. It's a script you use to justify abuse." Stevens shifted uncomfortably, his silence damning. Angela's eyes landed on him, and she asked quietly, "How many times did you use that phrase, Officer Stevens, knowing the truth was different?" He looked away, unable to answer. Whitman tried again, his politician's instinct clinging to survival. "General Brooks, if you really care about this community, you'll let us resolve this discreetly. End this before careers are ruined, before trust is shattered." Angela's reply was calm, deliberate. Trust was shattered the first time an innocent black driver was dragged from a car for living in the wrong neighborhood. Trust was shattered when mothers cried as their sons were booked for nothing more than asking why they were stopped. Tonight is not the beginning of chaos, Councilman. It is the beginning of accountability. The phones rang again, multiple lines lighting up across the station. An officer entered breathlessly. Captain Cole, calls are coming from the Department of Justice, the Governor's Office, and Pentagon Military Police Headquarters. They're all demanding updates on General Brooks. Cole's face paled further, and Whitman's hands shook as he adjusted his tie. Colonel Wright nodded at the officer. "Take those calls. Inform them the investigation is underway and evidence is being secured." Angela leaned forward, her voice calm but edged with fire. "Councilman Whitman, Captain Cole, Officer Stevens, you are no longer in control. Tonight you are subjects of an investigation, and the system you thought would protect you is about to expose you." Reed stepped closer to her, his voice low but resolute. "General, if they try to spin this, if they claim it was entrapment, my testimony will back your account. I've seen enough in 6 months to prove this program was corrupt from start." Angela looked at him with respect. "Your courage will matter, detective. When history looks back on this night, it will remember who stood on the side of the law and who hid behind prejudice." Wright's aide returned, handing him a secure phone. "Colonel, it's the Secretary of Defense." Wright passed it immediately to Angela. She took the phone, pressing it to her ear. The voice on the other end was firm, respectful. "General Brooks, you are authorized to oversee this operation alongside Colonel Wright. The Secretary commends your actions and assures full support from Washington. Justice will be served." Angela thanked the caller and hung up, her gaze sweeping the room. The highest levels are watching. Every second matters now. Begin the full evidence sweep. Military personnel moved swiftly, collecting hard drives, pulling surveillance footage, securing files that Cole and Whitman had believed untouchable. Cole tried to protest, but Wright silenced him. "Sit down, Captain. You've done enough damage." Whitman attempted one last maneuver. "You think you can humiliate me in front of my city, General? You'll regret this. My influence runs deeper than you imagine." Angela faced him squarely. "Influence built on fear collapses under truth. You're not facing me, Councilman. You're facing every citizen you tried to silence." The tension in the room was broken by the sound of boots in the hallway. A military officer entered briskly, saluting. "Colonel Wright, General Brooks, 3 black SUVs from the Pentagon have arrived. Additional investigative teams and legal advisors are here." Wright gestured for them to enter, and soon the room filled with a mix of military precision and federal determination. Evidence boards expanded, maps appeared showing checkpoint locations, and statistics were projected onto screens. Angela stood at the head of the table, her voice carrying authority. "This is not about one arrest. This is about a pattern, a system, a deliberate attack on constitutional rights. Tonight, we expose it fully." The air inside the Greenfield station shifted from arrogance to fear as federal investigators and military personnel streamed through the doors, their boots thudding against the tiled floor and their voices clipped with authority. General Angela Brooks, once shoved against a car hood and mocked as if she were nobody, now stood at the center of a command hub, her very presence radiating the authority that no badge or ordinance could diminish. Colonel Daniel Wright moved like a conductor, issuing orders to his team as computers were set up, cables run across the floor, and evidence boards filled with files pulled from Greenfield's most guarded cabinets. Detective Samuel Reed assisted without hesitation, providing the information he had gathered in secret over the past months, grateful that at last there were people in the room who wanted the truth rather than suppression. Councilman Charles Whitman tried to linger near the wall, arms folded, attempting to project calm though his shifting eyes betrayed panic, while Captain Richard Cole and Officer Mark Stevens sat pale and silent, the realization dawning that their careers and perhaps their freedom were slipping away. Angela knew this moment mattered, not just for her, but for every black resident of Westfield Heights who had been forced to live under checkpoints like criminals in their own city. She rose to her full height, her voice commanding the room. "Begin with the arrest records. Compare demographics. I want hard numbers." Analysts tapped keyboards rapidly, their screens filling with data. Within minutes, the evidence was visible for all to see. Checkpoint stops disproportionately targeting black drivers, searches performed on flimsy pretexts, arrests disproportionately applied, and white drivers waved through at rates so high it became statistical proof of selective enforcement. Angela gestured to the projection. 89% of searches involved minority drivers. 94% of arrests stemmed from those searches. Yet documented violations were identical across demographics. This is not coincidence. This is design. Reed stepped forward, adding context. Body camera footage shows officers instructed to use the phrase "stop resisting" as a script, even when citizens clearly complied. Complaints were buried. Evidence deleted. Internal memos instructed officers to prioritize Westfield Heights for stops because it was considered high yield. Colonel Wright nodded grimly. The Pentagon has suspected discriminatory intent. These numbers confirm it. Whitman, desperate to salvage something, interjected, his voice rising. Statistics can be twisted. You don't understand the realities of policing. Crime reduction requires tough measures. Angela turned on him sharply. This isn't policing. This is profiling. You created a program that criminalizes skin color and zip codes. You're not protecting Greenfield. You're protecting property values for the wealthy by driving out families you don't want here. Whitman tried to recover. That's an outrageous accusation. I authorized a safety program. Angela signaled to Wright, who pulled up a new document on the projector. Councilman Whitman, this is your signature on operational guidelines that specifically identify Westfield Heights as the target for enhanced screening. This isn't safety. It's targeted discrimination. Whitman's face went pale, his mouth opening then closing, words failing him for the first time that evening. Cole tried to deflect. You can't prove intent. We were just following orders. Reed immediately countered. Orders don't erase accountability. Every officer who enforced unconstitutional stops is responsible, especially when they laughed about it, mocked people, and escalated situations unnecessarily. Angela's watch had captured every word from earlier, and she now played back the audio of Cole and Stevens mocking her neighborhood, sneering about people like her needing to be put in their place. The sound filled the room, damning and undeniable. Stevens buried his face in his hands. Cole's jaw tightened, but his silence was an admission. Federal agents began bagging hard drives, seizing servers, copying files. Military specialists logged evidence, while Justice Department attorneys reviewed preliminary findings on site. Angela watched the activity, her heart heavy but steady. She knew this was the vindication her community needed, yet she also felt the weight of responsibility to ensure it led to lasting change rather than temporary outrage. Wright turned to her. General, we have teams ready to brief Washington tonight. The evidence is overwhelming. Indictments can be prepared immediately. Angela nodded. Good. But this isn't just about prosecutions. This is about dismantling a system. We need to build something better. Reed spoke quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for her to hear. Something that doesn't punish kids for walking home from school or mothers for questioning why their sons are detained. Angela looked at him, recognizing the sincerity in his eyes. That's exactly why we're here, Detective. To prove that justice doesn't depend on who you are or where you live. Whitman slammed his hand on the table, his voice desperate. You'll tear this city apart. You'll destroy the trust between law enforcement and the people. Angela faced him calmly. You destroyed that trust the moment you turned checkpoints into tools of harassment. Tonight, we begin restoring it. Outside, the low rumble of military vehicles remained constant, a reminder that federal oversight was now physical as well as procedural. Residents had begun gathering across the street, curious and whispering, their phones lighting the night as they recorded the sight of soldiers entering and exiting their local station. For the first time, Westfield Heights residents saw proof that their complaints had not been ignored, that someone with authority cared enough to intervene. Angela knew the symbolism mattered as much as the prosecutions. This was not just a legal battle, it was a moral one. Wright returned with another update. General, we've pulled communications between Whitman and developers. They discuss property acquisition plans contingent on driving down values in Westfield Heights. The checkpoints were designed to force families out. Gasps filled the room as the documents appeared on screen, damning evidence that the program was not only unconstitutional, but motivated by greed. Whitman shouted, "That's taken out of context. Standard urban development strategy." Angela cut him off sharply. "You exploited your position to profit from the suffering of black families." She had faced down foreign adversaries with less contempt than she felt now for the arrogance of Councilman Charles Whitman and the complicity of Captain Richard Cole and Officer Mark Stevens. Colonel Daniel Wright directed his men to secure every remaining device in the building, his tone sharp and unquestionable, while Justice Department attorneys whispered urgently as they sifted through folders of seized documents. Detective Samuel Reed handed over another packet of files, his voice steady despite the storm around him. "These are the internal memos I collected. Officers were instructed to prioritize Westfield Heights vehicles, label them as high risk, and find cause for arrest whether it existed or not." Angela took the documents, placing them on the evidence table. Her voice carried through the room, calm yet piercing. "This is the smoking gun. This program was never about public safety. It was a machine built to target black residents and drive them from their homes." On the projection screen, an email thread appeared, Whitman's name stamped clearly at the bottom. Developers had written to him about their plans to acquire property in Westfield Heights, their profits hinging on driving down market values. In response, Whitman had promised continued enforcement pressure to maintain compliance. Angela gestured to the evidence. "This is not governance. This is conspiracy." Families were harassed, businesses destabilized, and children traumatized, so developers could profit and politicians could claim rising property values. That is not law. That is exploitation at its most vile. Whitman slammed his hand on the table, his voice rising in desperation. "You're twisting words. Those emails were about revitalization, about making the city safer and more prosperous. You're framing me for doing my job." Angela's expression did not change. "Your job is to serve the people, not to sell them out. You targeted one community because of its demographics. That's not revitalization. That's racial cleansing in the language of policy." Reed stepped closer, his jaw tight. "I watched families torn apart because of those checkpoints. My own brother was detained for hours without cause, respected surgeon treated like a criminal because he drove through the wrong neighborhood. When I filed complaints, I was silenced. Internal affairs was blocked at every turn. But I kept the evidence, and tonight, it speaks louder than any excuse you can give." Colonel Wright nodded at his team, and a new set of files appeared on the screen. Arrest reports side by side, identical infractions, but one driver white, one black. The white driver received a warning. The black driver was searched, cuffed, and booked. The pattern repeated across dozens of cases. Angela addressed the room. "This is the definition of selective enforcement. It violates the Fourth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and every oath taken by those who enforced it." Cole leaned forward, his voice bitter. "We followed orders. We didn't write the policy. We enforced it as directed." Angela's reply was sharp. "Following unlawful orders is not a defense. You knew what you were doing. You mocked residents, you shut off cameras, you lied in reports. You didn't enforce the law, you corrupted it." Stevens muttered weakly, "We thought we were keeping the city safe." Angela turned her gaze on him. "By whose definition of safe? Safe for the white families who never faced your harassment, or safe for the developers who lined their pockets while Westfield Heights lived in fear? Safety that depends on skin color is not safety. It's oppression." The room fell silent, the weight of her words undeniable. A federal attorney rose, holding a folder. "Councilman Whitman, Captain Cole, Officer Stevens, based on preliminary evidence, you are under investigation for civil rights violations, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. Formal charges are being prepared." Whitman shot to his feet, his polished facade crumbling entirely. "This is a witch hunt. You can't prove intent. You're using political theater to destroy my career." Angela met his fury with calm certainty. "The evidence proves itself. Intent is clear in your words, your signatures, your laughter when you thought no one would ever hold you accountable. She tapped her watch, the device that had recorded every insult, every violation. You didn't just conspire on paper. You spoke your corruption into existence, and it has been preserved. Wright gestured to the military police. Secure the councilman and the captain for questioning. As Whitman and Cole protested, military officers guided them firmly out of the room, their protest drowned by the steady hum of investigators cataloging files. Stevens remained slumped in his chair, staring at the floor, his silence louder than any denial. Reed approached Angela quietly. "General, will this be enough? Will justice finally reach them?" Angela placed a hand on the files, her voice steady. "This is only the beginning. Justice isn't just about convictions. It's about restoring dignity to those who were robbed of it." She turned toward the wall of evidence, photographs of families stopped at checkpoints, children crying as their parents were cuffed, statistics showing the undeniable truth. We owe them more than prosecutions. We owe them the promise that this will never happen again. Reed nodded, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Then I'll testify. Whatever it takes, I'll stand in front of any court, any jury, and tell them what I've seen." Angela looked at him, seeing not just an ally, but proof that integrity could exist even in a broken system. "Your testimony will matter, detective. You've chosen courage when it was easier to stay silent. That's how change begins." Outside, residents of Westfield Heights had gathered, their voices carried on the night air as news spread that the Pentagon was inside the station, investigating the very program that had terrorized them for months. The dawn over Greenfield broke with a quiet clarity, sunlight filtering through the windows of the police station that had, only hours earlier, been the epicenter of arrogance and corruption. Now it was transformed into a federal command center, buzzing with investigators, attorneys, and military personnel, all working with a singular purpose: to dismantle a program built on prejudice and to replace it with accountability. General Angela Brooks stood at the head of the table, shoulders straight, eyes unwavering, as the final reports were compiled. Councilman Charles Whitman had been escorted out in handcuffs, his earlier boasts and political confidence shattered under the weight of undeniable evidence. Captain Richard Cole sat in silence in a holding room, no longer barking orders, but staring at the floor as if realizing that every step he had taken in the name of power had led him here. Officer Mark Stevens had signed a preliminary statement, his trembling hand admitting that he had lied, intimidated, and fabricated resistance charges against innocent citizens. His words a confession that would seal the case against him and others like him. Detective Samuel Reed stood beside Angela, exhausted yet resolute, his integrity shining through the fatigue. His decision to risk his career, now vindicated as his testimony, became a cornerstone of the case. Colonel Daniel Wright briefed Washington over secure lines, the Secretary of Defense already preparing joint press conferences with the Justice Department to announce the dismantling of the Greenfield checkpoint program and the indictments of those responsible. Outside the station, the crowd of Westfield Heights residents had grown, filling the street with faces that reflected both pain and hope, their chants rising with the rhythm of justice at last being heard. No more checkpoints. Equal rights now. Angela stepped outside to meet them, the flash of cameras and the hum of live streams capturing the moment as she stood on the steps in her plain civilian clothes. No uniform, no ribbons, just the undeniable dignity of a black woman who had refused to be broken. The crowd quieted as she raised her hand. "I came through a checkpoint last night as a black resident of Westfield Heights," she began, her voice steady but carrying emotion. "I was stopped, mocked, cuffed, and humiliated not because of anything I had done, but because of who I am and where I live. That is the reality many of you have endured for months, for years, without anyone listening. Today, that reality ends." The crowd erupted in applause, some crying openly, others holding their children closer, as if to shield them with hope. Angela continued, her words measured but powerful. "We have proved that this program was not about safety. It was about control. It was about profit. It was about fear. But justice is stronger than fear. Justice does not wear a color, does not choose a neighborhood, and does not belong to the powerful alone. Justice belongs to everyone. Reed stepped forward to join her, his presence at her side a symbol of a new alliance between integrity in law enforcement and the communities it must serve. "I worked inside this department," he said, his voice carrying to the crowd. "I saw the truth, and I chose to speak. It cost me. It will cost more. But I would rather lose comfort than lose my conscience. And I promise you, this is not the end. This is the beginning of a different kind of law enforcement, one that protects, not persecutes." The residents roared their approval, the chant changing now to "Justice now. Justice always." Angela looked at the young people in the crowd, their faces shining with energy, their voices the loudest of all. She thought of the children who would grow up without the shadow of checkpoints, the teenagers who would drive without the fear of being dragged from their cars, the families who would no longer weigh every trip to the grocery store against the possibility of harassment. She thought of the elderly residents who had lived too long under silent suffering, and she felt the weight of generations in her chest. Later that week, Angela testified before Congress in full uniform, for stars gleaming on her shoulders, medals testifying to decades of service, but it was her voice as a Black woman that carried the most weight. She laid out the evidence clearly: the discriminatory placement of checkpoints, the racial disparities in enforcement, the financial conspiracy that tied elected officials to developers eager to displace minority families. She called for reforms that would establish federal oversight of all checkpoint programs, mandatory data collection, and severe penalties for departments caught engaging in discriminatory practices. When a senator asked why she had subjected herself to arrest rather than simply revealing her rank, Angela answered with conviction: "Because most people cannot flash rank or privilege to escape injustice. If the system cannot protect the least powerful, then it is no system at all. I chose to experience what ordinary citizens experience, because only then could I show the nation what was happening in places like Greenfield." Her words struck the chamber like thunder, applause breaking out even before the gavel restored order. The Equitable Enforcement Act was drafted in the months that followed, embedding the lessons of Greenfield into law, ensuring that checkpoints could no longer be tools of oppression. Convictions tied to unlawful stops were overturned, records expunged, compensation funds established for families harmed by the program. Whitman was sentenced to federal prison for civil rights violations and corruption, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale of arrogance and greed. Cole lost his badge, his pension, and his freedom, convicted of perjury and abuse of power. Stevens cooperated in exchange for leniency, but would never wear a uniform again. Reed was recruited into the FBI's Civil Rights Division, his courage rewarded with a platform to expose corruption nationwide. And Angela Brooks returned to the Pentagon, where she oversaw a new oversight unit tasked with monitoring policing practices across the country. She carried the scars of that night, the bruises on her wrists fading but the memory permanent, a reminder of why she had chosen to endure humiliation when she could have revealed her identity at once. Months later, Angela visited Westfield Heights quietly, walking the streets where children now played freely without the looming shadow of flashing lights. At a community center, she listened as residents shared stories of how their lives had changed since the program ended. An elderly woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "General, my grandson lost his scholarship because of an arrest at a checkpoint. Now his record is cleared and he's back in college. You gave him his future back." Angela smiled softly, placing her hand over the woman's. "No, ma'am. He gave himself his future back. All I did was help clear the path." As Angela left the center, she glanced back at the families gathered there, black and white together, speaking not as divided neighborhoods, but as one community determined to heal. She knew the work was far from finished. There would be other battles, other programs cloaked in the language of safety that were truly rooted in prejudice. But Greenfield had proven that courage, truth, and unity could dismantle even the most entrenched systems of injustice. And that was the message she carried with her into every room, every meeting, every decision. That justice is not an ideal to admire, but a responsibility to uphold. For Angela Brooks, for Samuel Reed, and for the people of Westfield Heights, the end of the checkpoint program was not just a victory. It was beginning, a declaration